Hey, this is Susannah from Thornvale, and you're listening to Too Many Podcasts.
Hey there, people of the pods, and all of you podsters and podettes. It's another episode of Too Many Podcasts. I'm Jim, your personal podcast Sherpa, master of ceremonies, keeper of the flame, and lady of the lamp when I need the money, which has been pretty often. Theme week here at the chalet. This week's theme is storytelling, and my guest this week is Stacy the Kid. Stacy hosts the podcast Jaunts and Faults and is now co-hosting a new podcast as well. Stacy is a monologist, writer, and poet in addition to being a podcaster. And you thought your weekends were busy? I was lucky enough to catch him in between projects for a really interesting and enlightening interview. We'll also have Sherpa suggestions and later on, at long last, the details of this podcast's first contest that I'm sure at least 3 of you have been looking forward to. Okay, make that definitely 2. But you can't say that my YouTube channel didn't warn you. So let's get started with Stacy's interview right after this. Hey everybody, we're here in the conference room at the Sherpa Chalet, and my guest today is Stacy the Kid. Now you may not know Stacy, but he's got a new podcast out called Jaunts and Faults, and we're here to talk to him a little about the podcast and a little bit about himself. He's a really interesting guy, and I'm glad to have him on my show. So welcome to the podcast, Stacy.
Thank you for having me. I'm really grateful for it. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So first and foremost, I like to think of myself as a storyteller at play. Constantly wanting to be better at telling stories through different formats. I'm a spoken word poet. I'm an ex-military veteran. I am also a barista. That's the day job right now. And been in and out of performing and being on stage since I was about 8 years old, actually. Grew up in the church, so a lot of public speaking in that realm, and just kind of fell into this podcasting thing.
Okay. And have you always been writing?
Yes.
Yeah.
As early as I can remember, writing has always been a big part of my life. I used to keep a journal when I was younger. I stopped writing for a while, though, which is something that a lot of people tend to always be a little interested in, more so than anything else. Like, why did you stop writing? And for the most part, it had a lot to do with personal perception of myself in a big way of like not thinking that I was a good writer. And it took a while for me to get past that. So I stopped writing for about a solid almost decade when I was from high school up until now. So from about 16 until I was almost 26. I'm just turned 26 this past year. I picked back up writing in the past 2 years. So been a long, interesting ride with writing.
Okay. Were there any authors that like inspired you, or you just wanted to write because you just wanted to get your feelings out on paper?
I have so many different authors that have impacted me, man. In terms of sort of my main like top 3, there was Robert Jordan and his Wheel of Time series. There was R.A. Salvatore and his Drit Still Erden series. And then finally, a more contemporary, more modern day author, Neil Gaiman, and American Gods. And a lot of people probably know American Gods now because it's become a really well-renowned show. But I read the book beforehand and the Nazi Boys beforehand, so those 3 authors really, really heavily impacted me as a kid and throughout my life.
Are there any contemporary writers that you admire right now, or?
Right now, this is going to be a little off the wall.
Okay.
This is going to be a little off the wall because I don't consider this person necessarily. He's a writer, but he's not necessarily what people would consider a traditional writer. in the form of Dungeons and Dragons, we have, if anybody knows Critical Role, I know you had Savannah on not too long ago from Thornvale. I absolutely love her podcast. I love her. She's super cool. She and I have connected as well, and she probably talks about Critical Role a little bit. And Matt Mercer, like, he takes a lot of time writing out his entire world and his story, and I love that. I love his storytelling, man. His storytelling is phenomenal. But if we're not talking like something like that, poetry wise, Rudy Francisco, and Joshua Bennett. Those two guys hit near and dear to my heart, like so very, very much so. As young, because they're still very, very young, quote unquote, authors and poets, but they're still so well known. And a lot of times people talk about how being an author, you don't get your fame and your fortune until, and big air quotes on that, until after you pass, kind of thing. But with today's society and our social media world, that doesn't seem to be the case.
That's true. I guess you become a little bit more visible a lot quicker.
Yeah.
But I guess you have to hit the ground running though when you do it, right?
Yeah, you do, and it's interesting because, like, I remember the very first time I saw Joshua Bennett. I never got to see him in person. Never saw him live or anything like that. I saw him on YouTube, and it was the poem 10 Things I Want to Say to a Black Woman. And I remember watching this like small, it's basically like a small music video. And this music video, for lack of a better word, was so powerful that I immediately sent it to my mom. Like, I can't say it any better than this. Like, this guy has hit everything I ever wanted to say to you and say thank you for on the head. And this, just here, listen to it, watch it. And I think that's part of the reason why those guys hit so close to home. And Rudy Francisco, one of his poems, the very first one I heard from him was Scars to the New Boyfriend. And I was going through a really bad breakup at the time, so obviously, that resonated in its time for its purpose. So those are some of the more contemporary writers and poets that I really like. But honestly, man, I would say the very first three, Neil Gaiman, Ari Salvatore, Robert Jordan, those three definitely shaped my, for lack of a better word, my style, I guess, more so than anything else. So, yeah.
Okay. And you said that you were in the military. Thank you for your service, by the way.
Thank you.
Did that military lifestyle, did that affect any of your writing?
Oh, yes, very much so. But it's in a different, it's so, I don't want to say auxiliary or ancillary, but it's so understated that a lot of people may not pick it up. One of the things that I took from the military that kind of sticks to me today is cadence. When you're marching, there's singing cadence, and part of the reason why when you're marching is to keep you in a rhythm. And if you're in a rhythm, it makes the work easier. That's part of the reason why they do it. So you can march for miles and miles and just sing, and you can stay in that rhythm. It's sort of like if you watch a horse or a dog trot for millions of miles, it's because they have that sort of rhythm. And I took that sort of mindset in how I write, especially when I'm writing my poetry. It needs to have a certain cadence to it, a certain rhythm, because I want to pull people into that, to give them a specific feeling at the time. So a lot of my poems have like a certain like bounce to them, if you will. And but it's so minor, but at the same time, it's like a really big part of how I form my poetry, specifically my poetry.
Okay. And I want to talk a little bit about your podcast because it's really unique. You know, we were just saying that before. And so let's start with the simple stuff. Now, how did you get the title Jaunts and Faults?
I'm a word guy, man. I'm a real big word guy. So one of my favorite pastimes as a kid growing up was literally looking through the dictionary. And I used to look through the dictionary and thesaurus all the time. So much so that I just would look for other ways of saying something. Something so minor as, the sky is blue. I try to find out different ways of saying blue, cerulean, and navy, and all this other sapphire, and all these other ways of saying the word blue. And for me, my podcast is really about sort of discovering. It is about discovering, yourself a little bit and discovering and looking at yourself in the mirror. But it's also about the journey. So jaunts, a jaunt is a journey taking for pleasure, and specifically for pleasure. It is not about getting to a specific destination. It's not about getting around any specific type of obstacle. It's not about anything other than the pleasure of the journey. I really wanted to hone in on those types of things, but I also wanted to focus on, faults and problems and how sometimes in life, very, very much so, we overlook things. We overlook a lot of things, and we take a lot more for granted than we say we do. And that's a fault in and of itself. And being able to sort of play with that idea, but not like be so direct as to be like, you need to know, like, I don't want to beat people over the head, for lack of a better word or lack of a better term. I don't want to beat people over the head with the idea. So I want it to be fun, but I also want it to be something that you're exploring, something very deep and meaningful, for lack of a more direct answer, I guess.
Okay. Now, we can't talk about your podcast without not talking about Tsoro the Watcher.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I listened to one of your earlier shows, and you kind of explained where he came from. There's really, he's phonetically appropriately named, I guess you could say, because he does know sorrow and he does know sadness, and he seems kind of jaded by the world that he lives in.
Oh, yeah. Very much so. Sorrow is, he's a representation of a part of myself that I work very hard on. And that is cynicism, man. I believe, especially and this, may get a little heavy for some people, but, as a Black kid growing up in, Miami Gardens, Florida, where a lot of people, especially down here in South Florida, a lot of people, know it as the murder gardens. Like I never experienced a lot of what I know many people that are close to me have experienced, like losing family members, 2 blocks away from you. But it didn't happen to me necessarily, but it happened around me. And going through those types of things will kind of make you hardened to the world, make you a little pissed off, like, what, what? Why is this happening? And I've gotten very much into this rhythm, in this place of, hey, you can't change those types of things all the time as much as you want to. The best you can do is sometimes just hold up the mirror. And sorrow is that person. He can't do anything just because his own personal circumstance, he doesn't have the power to. So because he doesn't have the power to, the only thing he can do is recite all these tales and recite all these memories back to people and tell the stories of, brokenness and horrible actions, but also the good stuff too. Like, there's one part of the episode where he mentions, in one of my episodes, I think it was like the third or fourth episode, where he mentioned Stefan's daughter. And he goes into this sort of side rant about how people call her stupid, how people call her, just a silly girl because she's still smiling anyway. And that for me was him, like, it wasn't him calling her stupid. It wasn't him calling her silly. It was more him, going, but look, man, even though she just lost her dad, even though she's in the world by herself now, she's still able to smile. And look at the rest of these people that are downing her for that. Like, how stupid are they? And that to me is where Tsoro's like power really lies as a narrator and as a character. He can see those types of things that people take for granted and go, yeah, they don't really understand the power of this one little child, Mm-hmm. So, yeah, Tsoro the Watcher. Good. I like that character a lot, man. I like that character a lot.
And you've just wound down with your first portion of the story, is that correct?
Yes. So the first segment of the story has it was sort of like an introduction. It was a way of getting people to know Tsoro a little bit and to introduce them to the world that he lives in. And now we're going to be going sort of backwards and telling the history of kind of how we got to this point. So I'm actually really excited. I'm not going to be working on this by myself. I do have voice actors and artists that'll be helping me out with this. So I'm really, really excited for the next couple of episodes. I got a buddy of mine who's a really great voice actor. We actually recorded a small little segment of that today. So super, super fun, super, super happy about that.
Okay. And I understand that congratulations are in order because you're going to be a dad?
Yeah. Oh, man. That's another reason why I think this is sort of come about and started more so. One of the biggest things that I was kind of brought up on was the idea of right. But one of the things that my dad has always kind of like beat into my skull is, hey man, kids don't do what you say, they do what you do. So for me, it's like, if I want to be an example to my son, and I am having a little boy, if I want to be the best example I can be, I need to first be the best man in person that I can be. And not by anybody else's standards, but my own. And that's the big thing right now. So I'm trying my best to be a better storyteller. I'm trying my best to be a better podcaster. And if people love it, people like it, that's awesome. If people don't, then hey, it's not really for them. It's about me and my journey and telling the stories that I want to hear.
Now, what kind of stories do you think that you'll be reading to your son once he's born?
Honestly, I'll probably be reading the same things that my dad read to me. My dad read like Moby Dick to me and Dickens and like Edgar Allan Poe. And people are like, what? I'm like, yeah, that's the stuff my dad read to me.
That's
so
great.
Some really thoughtful, fun things.
Now, I understand you just launched another podcast called Playing in Minefields. You want to talk about that a little bit?
So Playing in Minefields is a podcast that is focused around the relationship to self, first and foremost. So to kind of give you an example, one of the things I just mentioned was, if people like it, cool. If people don't, it's not really about people enjoying my content. It's about my journey and telling the stories I want to hear. And ultimately, what I believe is, if you are going to have healthy relationships of any kind, whether it is friendships, whether it's business relationships, whether it's romantic relationships. Ultimately, that boils down to being a healthy person and understanding, accepting, and working on self. So me and my buddy Alex Obed, really, really awesome guy. I love him to death. He and I are completely two different ends of the spectrum in terms of where we grew up, what we've been exposed to, sort of how we live our lives. And we talk about those things. We talk about everything from society and how society pushes masculinity on men to philosophy and how that all relates back to how does one deal with the inner self and how does one become more integrated and more authentically themselves.
That's great. It was funny, you were talking about cadence earlier, and does working with a co-host now, does that kind of change your cadence for doing a show?
A little bit, a little bit. It's interesting because it's like one thing that I appreciate about my buddy Alex is that Alex and we talked for like a solid year before we ever started the podcast. And in doing that, we were able to like understand sort of what our rhythm was. So we were able to get the call and response down. And if you listen to the podcast, you'll notice like there'll be times where we'll go off on tangents, but because of the way we sort of work together so well, it's easy enough for us to pop back into something, hit on one point, jump over to the next point, and it doesn't lose its flow, which is one of the reasons why I love working with him so very much, man. It makes the cadence a little bit easier, believe it or not. Because it's like I have a wall to bounce the idea off of. And when they send it back to me, it's not like they're sending it back to me and it's so out of left field that it's hard to reach. It's more like, okay, now I can hit it back this way or that way, and we can go down this path or that path. And that's one of the things that I love about it.
Well, since we're talking about podcasts, and this is a show about podcasts, are there any special podcasts that you like to listen to? And I say the word podcast a lot.
Oh, man. So absolutely, if you guys aren't listening to Susannah in Thornvale, her podcast is phenomenal. I love it. I've been listening to it ever since she released it. So really, really like Thornvale. Beyond Thornvale, I've been listening to Critical Role, obviously. And I've also been listening to Snap Judgment and a few other ones along that lines, like storytelling. And I really honestly don't like super heavy production on my podcast, which is sort of weird for somebody like myself, because I really like high production, like value, like film, but not in my podcast. I really just enjoy hearing people's voices and hearing how they're able to stretch and utilize their own tool.
A lot of your podcast is based on your writings and your dialogue, and the more sparse you're keeping it also, I think the listener would, notice what you're saying and not listen to the dun, 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 behind it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of the reason why I enjoy the podcast that I enjoy, because a lot of them don't have really, really heavy production behind it. You kind of have to listen and take in the story and the dialogue. And that, to me, less is more, right? Less is more, and I love that.
Absolutely. All right, we do have a portion of the interview that we call Shameless Self-Promotion, and this is where I turn it over to you, and you can let everybody know, what you're up to, where they can get in contact with you, whatever you want to sell. The mic is all yours, sir.
All right, so if you guys are wanting to listen to Jaunts and Faults, that is JAUNTSANDFALTS, Anchor.fm. Go ahead and check me out over there. If you want to keep up to date with me on any of my social media, by all means, please do. You can find me under Stacy.the.Kid on Twitter, on Instagram, Facebook. You can find me on HoloSpace. I'm on a bunch of different social media platforms. So just go ahead and type in Stacy.the.Kid Kid, and you'll be able to find me.
One last quick question that I just thought of. How'd you end up with the Kid? How did you get the nickname?
So that is actually a reminder to myself. Never to take the adult pill. Yeah, that's really what it is. It's a reminder to myself to make sure that I continuously have fun with what I'm doing. So as long as I'm having fun, I'll keep doing it.
I like it. Guys, Jaunts and Faults, that's Stacy the Kid. Check out his podcast. And Stacy, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Jim. I really appreciate this.
Oh, my pleasure. Take care. Hey, it's time for Sherpa Suggestions. Here are a few more storytelling podcasts to check out if you like podcasts like Jaunts and Faults. Snap Judgment, which is described as storytelling with a beat. This is presented by WNYC Studios. Also, we have The Truth, Selected Shorts, the Stoop Storytelling Series. These are true stories told in front of live studio audiences. And finally, This American Life. This is a weekly podcast which has been heard by over 2 million people and has won all of the major broadcasting awards. All right, that's it for this week's Sherpa Suggestions, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thanks for checking out Too Many Podcasts. And a special thanks to Stacy the Kid for coming on the show. Check out Jaunts and Faults and Playing with Minefields. You won't be disappointed. Don't forget, you can find my podcast on almost every podcast app, except for one, which I'm working on. I'll keep you posted about that app with the letter I in the heart. Don't forget to leave a nice review on iTunes, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. And now there's a really good reason to do so. And that reason is behind the first contest brought to you by Too Many Podcasts. Here's what you need to know. Listen and subscribe, leave a nice review on Stitcher or iTunes and Apple Podcasts, and follow me on social media and post hashtag Viva la Sherpalution on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. I'll be looking for reviews and posts and choosing people to be guests on this podcast. See, potential fame awaits. The contest will run through the end of July, so check out my YouTube channel, Jim the Podcast Sherpa, for more details after the show airs. For more details, you'll get at least a 10-minute interview where you can promote whatever you want. You can email me at jimthepodcastsherpa@gmail.com to let me know what you'd like to do, and we'll iron the details out. There can possibly be more than one winner, so please make sure that you leave the review first, because that's where I'm going to be looking at finalists. So until next time, as we Sherpas like to say, enter the contest already. Thanks for listening. See you next time, you potential contest winner, you.